Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patrick Huston. I'm a retired Army general. I'm a lawyer in San Francisco. I'm the general counsel now for Ondas Holdings, which is a publicly traded technology company. I'm also on the board of AI Comply, which is a cybersecurity compliance company, and I'm a member of the FBI's AI task force. Most importantly, I'm thrilled to moderate this panel today on geopolitics and cybersecurity. Now, we all know that the board's role is to keep a strategic perspective because our C-suites tend to be focused on the day-to-day operations of running the company. And what could be more strategic than geopolitics? Now, unfortunately, we scheduled this session several months ago, and there was nothing going on. It was a quiet, sleepy world. So NACD reached out to several world leaders and said, hey, help us out. We need some discussion topics. Maybe you can throw in some tariffs or trade wars, maybe some good old-fashioned shooting wars across the Middle East or even Europe, or maybe even a little cybersecurity detente between the US and Russia. And wow, did they deliver for us. We have a lot to talk about today and an amazing panel lined up for you to do just that. I'd like each one of the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Vijay.
Well, thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having me here. I'm Vijay Jajoo. I'm a partner in KPMG's technology consulting practice based here in Silicon Valley. For over 20 years, I had the privilege of serving some of our largest tech companies, throughout sort of building and executing strategies, deploying tech solutions, with the ultimate goal of how do you build customer trust and while you want to drive sustainable growth. So every day, sort of my personal mission is how do we keep internet safe for our friends, families, and communities. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks to you, Vijay, and KPMG for sponsoring this session. Now over to Travis, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Travis LeBlanc. I am the global co-chair of the cyber data privacy practice at Cooley, resident in our San Francisco and Washington, D.C. offices. Today, I'm actually in Seattle, Washington. Cooley is one of the leading global law firms, regularly advising our clients on the innovations of today and tomorrow, and especially with respect to boards as well. I myself have gone back and forth between government and the private sector during my career. I was the chief of enforcement for the FCC. I worked in the California Attorney General's office for former Attorney General Kamala Harris and created the privacy and high-tech crime units there. Worked at the U.S. Department of Justice and also served on the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board for the United States. Delighted to be here with you and look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Travis, and to Cooley for being another sponsor. And over to our third sponsor from Zscaler, Rob.
Hey, thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Sloan. I'm the VP of Cybersecurity at Zscaler. We're a cloud security company based in San Jose. We're also a proud sponsor of the NACD Northern California chapter. This is our first outing together. I've spent 23 years now working in cybersecurity. Started my career in UK government, working defense and foreign affairs, looking at some of the earliest state-sponsored cyber attacks against government, military, and critical infrastructure networks. I then moved into the private sector, spent 3 years setting up and running an incident response division within a cybersecurity consultancy. I then moved again to the US, where I joined the Wall Street Journal and spent 10 years there setting up their cyber newsletter, working on their cybersecurity reporting team, doing research, holding events, generally contributing to the conversation at a business level rather than a technology level. So I'm at home today in Princeton, New Jersey, but I did spend 5 very, very happy years in the Bay Area, so I feel an affinity to all over there. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here, Rob. And finally, over to Anthony.
Hi, my name is Anthony Soohoo. I'm the chairman and CEO at MoneyGram. We're a global payments company. Actually, the best way to kind of think about us is that we're a global payments network and probably one of the largest ones that a lot of people actually don't realize. We serve payments across the world in over 200 countries, 450,000 retail locations, as well as 5 billion digital endpoints. So the idea of anything around cyber as well as global transactions. It's near and dear to our heart. And in fact, I think, we have a very important mission in our mind at MoneyGram, which is to connect the world by making the movement of money across borders seamless, affordable, and secure for everyone. And that mission does not happen unless we can do it in a safe and secure way. So excited about this conversation.
Yeah. So thank you all. As all of you in the audience can see, it's a powerhouse lineup here to discuss this topic. I'd like to dive right in and ask Vijay to help us set the scene with maybe a high-level overview of the current cybersecurity landscape out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think no surprise for everybody, right? The landscape, the whole cyber landscape is complex. And I think it's complex for a variety of different factors, right? If I think about the compounding impact that it has on some of our kind of organizations as well as nations. First, Patrick, you talked about, geopolitical tension. So think about, of course, the war, for Russia and Ukraine, the Middle East crisis. We've seen sort of examples, the first day the Russia sort of attacked Ukraine, there was a VSAT satellite that was compromised, and that disrupted, both European operations, even U.S. companies' communications. And we've seen the start of the whole Israel and Palestinian conflict, and the Iranian hacker groups have been sort of targeting, U.S. water utilities, healthcare. Why? Because the U.S. Some of those organizations were using the software supplied by Israeli organizations. So I think that the whole geopolitical tension is sort of raising, and I think when we talk to the C-suite and the board, our clients are definitely sort of the cybersecurity has kind of risen, just the nature of the fact, whether you have your suppliers or your operations in those regions, or you're supporting some of the cause, it's kind of a direct sort of correlation there. Second, we see, just because of the global nature, sort of the whole third-party risk management has again come back, and risen to the top. Like 54% of the organizations in one of the surveys, they're sort of saying this is a major concern in terms of the dependencies and the third-party risk. And some of the incidents that we sort of investigate, like 15% of the incidents actually have some sort of a starting point from some of these third parties. And number three, I would say, look at the sophistication of kind of cybercrime, right? You're seeing, much more sophisticated phishing attempt, an increase in social engineering attacks. I think the attack vectors are the same. We are seeing the sophistication going much more sort of aggressively and at a higher scale, right? Seeing the identity theft, Anthony talked about on the payment side as well. We're seeing a lot more of the credential and account takeover fraud that goes on. And number four, like no conversation will go, undone. It's all about the AI and the emerging tech, right? So, we're seeing the variants of ChatGPT, like the fraud GPT, worm GPT, and then making it so much easier for the bad guys to make it, in 5 clicks, I can create like a whole, phishing site and find the vulnerabilities of any particular organization. So the ability for bad guys to do the recon, the initial compromise, has become so much easier. So that's also helping their cause and make it difficult for us. And last, I would say is like, think about the whole emerging regulation. Patrick, we just talked about, how, so the global nature of it, not just from a US standpoint, right? There is a lot more fluidity in terms of how the regs are coming. And my personal passion, where I work with some of the big tech clients, is about sort of public safety or the trust and safety for users. So think about your large, search engine or large tech companies where the regulations are coming from Europe, et cetera. They all expect, in conversation with our C-suite and the board, they expect the regulations will help stabilize or establish a baseline. But where the challenge we see from a management and the board perspective is the federated nature, or it's very heterogeneous. It's very hard to implement regulation. So I think the factors of kind of these 5 sort of compounding factors, I would say, the threat landscape is super, evolving in making it complex. Hence the need for like, how do we make sure the cybersecurity sort of having a robust measures and the efficacy of how you implement the program is a lot more important and crucial in these times.
Well, that wasn't exactly the most optimistic view of everything, but a very comprehensive assessment of the risk. I thank you very much. I want to turn to Anthony as our panel CEO and board chair here, to get your perspective, Anthony. You know, you've seen, or have you seen, a rise in geopolitical tensions that impact corporate cybersecurity risks? And if so, how are boards addressing these? Like, what committee? Where's it being done, and where should it be done?
A great question, and the short answer is that I think geopolitical tensions in cybersecurity is now inextricably connected or linked. Because I think in the past, when we thought about cybersecurity, it was just about criminals. But now when you think about it, it's state actors, it's economic warfare, and there's a lot more like gray zone tactics, especially around elections with disinformation and IP theft. I think in this kind of environment, I think the boards and companies need to look at this as not an audit, or think about cyber as an audit committee event. In fact, I think that way of thinking is pretty outdated. In fact, I think moving forward, the best boards that I see, it's cyber security is really a full board conversation. And it's really much more centered around business resiliency, regulatory, reputational issues. And as a result, I think a lot of this topic is being integrated into risk committees, full board discussions, as well as I know we talk about it as well in our strategy sessions. And I think that maybe the biggest key takeaway is for companies to not think about cyber as just a compliance checkbox, but much more as a mindset to think about resiliency in the business, and in doing that at a strategic level.
Great point. You reminded me, when I was in government service in Washington, D.C., clearly the focus was on national security and traditional espionage, whereas here in Silicon Valley, the focus is on commercial espionage and that IP theft that you mentioned over there. And, you know, I guess,
hey, Patrick, you know, one thing I would want to bring up, I'm so sorry for one of the things we have seen too in our circles is much more of a demand for people actually who worked in the military, because the mindset shift is no longer if you just had an IT background. In fact, we're looking for people who have a military background that actually understand defense and offense, as well as people who have an IT background, which is, I think, an evolution that's changed a lot. And sorry for cutting you off, but I want to make that point.
No problem at all. And the other point that you reminded me of is sort of the different kind of layout that we have of the companies here, mainly in Northern California. You know, the Fortune 500 boards are made up of one structure, very comprehensive, a lot of committees and subcommittees, risk, cybersecurity. Here we have a lot of much smaller public companies, or in many cases even private companies, with less well-developed boards. And a lot of time, you're right, it is the full board without any committees that are just tackling all the responsibilities of the board all at once. So thank you for that. Travis, I'd like to turn to you as the lawyer on the panel here and say, hey, in light of all these global developments, are there any legal or regulatory developments that the boards should be aware of, particularly on cybersecurity, business resilience, or other risks out there?
Thanks, Patrick. I'm happy to be the designated lawyer for the panel and to discuss some of the regulatory and legal developments that we're really seeing with the new Trump administration, which is probably the biggest change from 2024 until 2025. And we're seeing a lot of it play out in other contexts, but there are ramifications for cyber as well. I think what probably everyone is seeing play out is just the sheer reduction in the size of the federal government. And it may not seem at first like that has a cyber angle to it, but over decades, the federal government has built up a massive amount of cyber expertise in agencies across the federal government. We are seeing an exodus, a mass exodus of that cyber expertise. Anthony, you'll be able to hire them soon. But we are seeing a mass exodus of cyber expertise from the government. That is going to have long-term effects on the sophistication at which the U.S. Government approaches cyber issues. Relatedly, we're also seeing a disbanding of public-private partnerships on cyber. Cyber is a space where it really does benefit the government quite a bit to have partnerships with industry, because much of the threat is targeting industry. And so there are private public partnerships. One example of an alliance or an advisory board was the Cyber Safety Review Board, which had been looking at Salt Typhoon and other nation-state threats against the cyber infrastructure of the United States. That was disbanded. And the expertise that they would have brought that would have helped provide guidance to all the rest of us on threats that were emerging and efforts to avoid them will not be there. The administration is very focused on deregulation as well. In the first Trump administration, there was a general rule of for every one regulation that you want to propose, an agency had to get rid of 4. Now it's 1 to 10 regulations that you have to get through. And so invariably, there will be a deep look at the regulations that need to be deleted or removed. And one regulation that is squarely in the eyesight of the SEC is the 2023 cybersecurity rule that went into effect in December that really required public companies to report material cyber incidents within 4 business days of a determination of materiality, and also required a lot more disclosures around cybersecurity risk management. That is a regulation that we expect to either be fully revoked or substantially revised over time. And as that plays itself out, there are lots of other decisions that the SEC made in the last administration that are being called into question beyond the cybersecurity rule. One that gets a lot of discussion is the SolarWinds litigation, and whether the SEC will continue its posture of being as aggressive as it has been in the past about ensuring the accuracy of statements that public companies make around their cybersecurity risk management and posture. In SolarWinds, it was one of the more famous hacks, cyber attacks that have taken place in recent years. The SEC brought an action against both the company and the Chief Information Security Officer, the CISO for the company. It was an extremely aggressive case that they brought. They also related to it, went after a law firm as well to learn the identity of all its clients that had been impacted by SolarWinds. So extremely aggressive posture. A judge in the fall of last year in New York reduced the case substantially, but did not dismiss it. And so there's some takeaways that I'd like to leave you with around what every board director really ought to be wondering about in light of the SolarWinds action. Number one is, I would recommend that you scrutinize public-facing data or product or cyber security statements. Any public-facing statement about security should be scrutinized. Sometimes these come in the context of security white papers or ESG statements, marketing materials, especially financial statements, to make sure that you're not overstating the security of the product or platform of the company or organization, and that you're also being accurate. Secondly, I'd recommend that you open up lines of communication between the Chief Information Security Officer or your security professionals if you don't have a CISO, and the relevant business stakeholders. In particular, opening up a conversation between the CISO and the board. Anthony is spot on that cybersecurity risk management is now a board issue. Whether you look at it at the full board or you create a specialized subcommittee of the board, say a cybersecurity risk management committee, there has to be a dialogue between the information security professionals in the company and the board. It can't just be the normal C-suite conversation. And finally, I would mention that the security team really needs to be trained about how to communicate with management as well as communicating internally. As a lawyer who's seen a lot of these incidents and read the emails, seen the way people react as soon as they find out that there was a breach or some other incident, the way that they push, the language and choice of language is not always optimal in ways that we know that the finance arm would not use. We're encouraging a level of training so that that language can be moderated from the beginning. Outside of the SEC, I would just mention there's lots of activity around national security, and in particular around the Department of Justice's efforts to regulate any interactions a company has with China, as well as a few other countries. But I just highlight that if your company has any interactions or business or employees that are touching China, data going to China, that's a high risk area, and a lot of questions need to be asked.
Wow. Thanks, Travis. Such great points. I was definitely not tracking all of those. I appreciate that. I want to turn to Rob now. And Rob, Zscaler is an absolute cybersecurity powerhouse. And with these evolving cyber threats that are out there, how can companies leverage emerging technologies to stay ahead of the curve and mitigate or at least manage these risks?
Yes, I think that there's one simple solution to all emerging cyber threat and risk issues, and that's AI. The problem, though, is that annoyingly, AI is also the cause of all the emerging threat and risk issues. It's something of a double-edged sword. And I can hear the collective eye roll in the audience because I realize AI is always billed as a solution to every problem right now. But maybe if I can start by talking a little bit about what we're seeing the threat actors do, that puts the solution in some context. So the attackers are using AI the same way as we are. They're trying to make their lives easier. As Vijay said, they're using it to create more realistic phishing emails. They're using a few prompts to create websites that look genuine to try and get us to enter our passwords and login details. It speeds up that process of reconnaissance on their targets, help them find weak spots on our networks. So it helps them work at greater scale, greater accuracy, more effective, faster, cheaper. It tips the scales in their favor. And I think we know a lot about criminal use of AI. We don't necessarily know as much about nation state, but we do know it's happening. There's a report a couple of weeks ago published by Google. I can link to it in the chat if I can find the report. Published to say how Russian, Chinese, and Iranian threat actors have been observed using their Gemini AI chatbot tool to sort of as part of their process for conducting attacks. Because the slightly misleading thing is we're only seeing a tiny slice of what Google sees. They're matching attacker IP addresses to activity on Gemini. They're only seeing a small slice. There are lots and lots of AI assistants out there, and many of them have fewer guardrails for safe use than Gemini or ChatGPT do. The other thing I'm seeing a lot of is deepfake videos and cloned voices and how easy AI is making. I think it's a risk that's often overlooked by companies at the moment. I'll share two quick examples. A few months ago, a UK-based engineering company transferred $25 million to an unknown third party. And they did this because a member of the finance team had been duped into believing she had been speaking with the CFO. It turns out it almost certainly wasn't. It definitely wasn't the CFO, but it appears it was a deep fake of the CFO talking to her. Very easy to create. Lots of tools online now that can do this with relatively small samples of video to make an effective deep fake. Of course, we don't have the record of what actually happened, but we'll take her word for it. Closer to home, criminals cloned the voice of my CEO, Jay Chowdhury, as part of an attack. So multiple employees across the company, the phone rings, they answer it, they get this message says, "Hi, this is Jay, I need you to do something for me." And then the line goes dead. Sounded like Jay, the pitch was right, the intonation was right. They then get a text message saying, "I need you to go and buy some gift cards. I'm with a client, I need to pay this client back a favor." Okay, to us on this call, that doesn't sound like a very sophisticated attack. When you're a junior employee and you think that the CEO's just called you, you're going to act. And a couple of employees did. They gave the numbers and they sent them off. A small fraud, right? But it's very easy. Any of you on the call who are a C-suite in large companies or board directors with a public profile, you could be attacked in this way. Your voice, your image could be used. So here's the good news, though, and that's that cybersecurity is the perfect use case. AI is the cyber, getting muddled, excuse me. Cybersecurity is the perfect use case for AI, right? Masses of data, very difficult for humans to get their head around all that data to make sense of it. We're looking for tiny anomalies in billions of daily transactions on our networks. It's a needle in a haystack, smaller than that. AI can learn what's going on out there, what's bad, what's good, and can flag things far better than any human team of specialists could. Lots of vendors are building this into their products, Zscaler included, to make this easier. I think the only downside that I'm seeing at the moment, just as a final thought here, is inertia, right? The technology's out there. The technology is not the problem. The availability, the efficacy of the technology is not the problem. It's the speed at which companies are able to adopt it. Companies work at a slower pace than criminals who can use every new technology without fear of reputational risk, regulatory penalty if it goes wrong. They're embracing it quickly. We're a little slower to catch up. But it's there, it's coming, and it is going to help us.
I'm a little torn, Rob, between thanking you for that optimism and condemning you for scaring the hell out of all of us with the AI risks that are out there. That actually, I want us to all to transition into this. We've got a great overview of what's happening out there. Now I want to look at some practical examples and some strategies for dealing with them. I want to circle back to Vijay and kind of picking up right where you left off with these AI threats out there. Vijay, have you seen a change to this level of sophistication of cyber attacks? And how are you advising clients out there to effectively manage and respond to these threats? And particularly boards, how should they be garnering the right skills to deal with the upcoming technological advancements?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think as even Rob mentioned, right, it's like, securing AI and then AI for security, right? I think those kind of go hand in glove. I think let me just share quick kind of 3 simple examples and summarize in the different buckets. One, I think from a board perspective, definitely think about, yes, we're all talking about AI and how it's influencing, giving the bad guys an upper edge in some respect, but there's a bunch of security 101. Can we just take care of the foundations first? I think let's just be kind of pretty frank and blunt for all of us who've been in the tech industry and in the security industry, myself included, for like 25 years. It's like, 3 simple things. If those weaknesses were handled, we look at all the incident data that we handle, from a KPMG perspective. Number 1 culprit is software vulnerabilities, internet facing. Like hands down, as the bad guys, we are making their lives easier. So let's take care of kind of the simple things. So from a board perspective, really sort of challenging the management to say, like, how's our sort of posture in terms of the most critical assets, especially let's say you're a, internet facing business, or you've got a sort of key, front end sort of revenue generating process. Number 2, we see that in terms of the identity fraud, like the fraud like Rob was talking about, the Jay Chaudhry being targeted as an example. So we see a lot of sort of, credential being stolen, like identity thefts, of course, phishing and social engineering being used. We still see that. So I think it's not a new problem. It's just been around. So again, like, are we making sure we have kind of the right, zero trust architecture and the capabilities like from Zscaler and others, or like, we're making sure we have the right multi-factor authentication and the right level of education awareness. Number 3, it's like, we don't have consistent coverage across sort of our organization. So we see all of our large companies, smaller organizations, is like, oh, we have a set of technologies and capabilities deployed in one area, but maybe an acquired entity because it's kind of left open. So the bad guys sort of compromise that. So I think from a board perspective, also sort of challenging the management to say, do we have consistent coverage, especially from a key capability, key assets? We are not leaving sort of 15% of our organization totally sort of not monitored. So I think if you think about those 3 simple reasons, while we look at a whole bunch of incidents, we manage, do forensics, etc., That's kind of the lessons learned in that, right? So while kind of be talking about AI, but just can we take care of the basics first? So now think about from an AI perspective, right? For one of the large tech companies, they've done some pretty they're of course building their own AI products, and then of course other organizations are using the AI products, and of course they're consuming third-party AI tools, both for security and other productivity, et cetera, requirements. What they have done, because it's a super large organization, complex, et cetera, what they have done is sort of they've taken sort of in three sort of the tranches. One is sort of really from a board perspective, as well as the senior leadership from C-suite, CEO down to the VPs, as well as the sort of the manager director group. They've created this sort of the governance and risk and compliance sort of quote unquote committee, if I may, where the product launch decisions, the blockers are super well challenged, understand the risk. Yes, is it a launch blocker that the right level of security or data protection measures are not being taken care of? So they've really tightened up from in terms of all the way top, from a policy making to the standards, to the risk assessment playbooks, to making sure there is visibility and bottoms up from KRIs, KPIs, all the tests that are being done to sort of demonstrate. So they've really streamlined across their product lines, across the geographies, to really drive that level of synergy and visibility. And board is super engaged as well. So I think that's sort of one way to making sure they have the right sort of the governing body and the governing mechanism and decision making and visibility. Number two, they're really focused on all of the development and deployment. So all the DevOps tool in terms of testing for different attack vectors, for prompt injection and data poisoning. So they've got really tight mechanisms to make sure so all the efficacy of the controls, it's being implemented. So I think those are the two big areas they really focus on sort of the making sure there's a right level of efficacy from the top, and all the data in terms of the data protection, privacy, and then feeding all the way back up from a decision-making perspective. And real quick, probably another case study and a lesson learned, I'll kind of say from a KPMG standpoint as well, how we sort of adopted and deployed, massively to, several, 100,000 people, sort of globally for us as well as in the US. We kind of took another very simple approach because we know we are adopting and disrupting our own sort of business model, right? Again, from a board perspective, as a case study, if I may, it's a very simple way to say, you know what, I'm going to turn off all the different domains that the users may go and put your own data at risk. So going to turn that off and sort of turn back on the ones that you really care about. So yes, specific, whether it's, OpenAI, in your case, or Microsoft or Google or Meta in scenarios. So think about where you want to go outside. So you really kind of control what goes out. Second, I think we made sure like it's all in our own private sort of the Azure tenant in our case, right? So we made sure like it's all contained in our environment, all the sort of right level of security. And we gave options to the team members, right? We're making sure they have the right authorized channel rather than them going sort of kind of wild. And the third is that we really made sure the right level of data loss prevention tool, sort of multi-factor access, authentication, authorization. So we are giving them the sort of ability to innovate, ability to thrive and drive some of the product productivity and capabilities we need, so that our teams are not going elsewhere, but we're making sure it's in a very controlled and safe environment. And of course, the board is aware of, involved in all the technological decisioning, as well as seeing the output and the value that we are providing. So again, I think it's Patrick, I would say like making sure we are taking care of the basics, really make sure it's very comprehensive, not just kind of, lose eye on the ball. So we go all towards AI, but forget the quote unquote IT 101 or security 101. But whereas also Rob said, there are some amazing opportunities. We are seeing AI from a security perspective and phishing, security operations centers, amazing innovation we are seeing in deployment of different AI tools to drive the level of decisioning as well as, triage.
Those are great points, Vijay. Really good practical advice. Thank you so much. I want to turn to Anthony. Anthony, I know that boards are like families. No two are identical, but how does your board approach cyber at the strategic level? And are you seeing any frameworks or strategies to help enhance resilience and mitigate these risks, especially with third-party vendors out there that Vijay referred to in his opening comments?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question you asked there, Patrick. You know, the boards I've been involved with, we look at this in terms of really three main buckets. One is we do focus on active threat intelligence and stress testing. It's a very big point. I'll come back to each of these. Number two is we do look at third-party securities with a lot of our partners and vendors, especially around this kind of zero trust mindset. And I'll come back to that. And then thinking thoughtfully about how AI can be a force multiplier for us. So when we go back to the active threat intelligence, we're actually seeing and actually having a lot of fun while we're learning, going through not just looking at static reports, but really going through real world attack simulations with external experts, testing how we would respond, for instance, to nation state level threats. We're also requiring continuous updates, I think, from our leaders and our boards and experts around in our ecosystem to talk more about adversaries and where their organizations are going. On the third-party security front, I think a lot of times organizations are not spending enough time thinking about actually where their vulnerability points are. And I think it's a really good point that was brought up earlier about third-party security, because we take a zero trust mindset with our third-party vendors and partners. And because what we found is it's typically one of the biggest blind spots for most boards. I don't think that gets asked enough. And does not get, it does not show up in most audits with vendors that we found. And I think even auditing once a year is not enough. So we have continuous monitoring of our and real-time threat sharing with our key partners, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And if a third party touches our data, we make sure that they follow our security standards, not theirs, with no exceptions. And then in terms of AI as a force multiplier, I think that it is changing the game, as mentioned earlier, where it is changing the game for both the attackers and defenders. We're looking to use AI really for using it for real-time anomaly detection, which is something that I don't think really existed in the past. We're looking at it in terms of automated threat responses, shutting vulnerability loops in real time, and also looking a lot at behavioral analytics of various different people that would touch our systems. And then while AI is great, and I think there was a mention earlier that, AI has kind of been thought of as a panacea to solve all our woes, we do know that, outsourcing that judgment out to AI will only get you in more trouble, because I think that human beings really, in terms of leveraging the speed of AI to react to environments, but really making sure the best defense is really AI driven but human led, is a really important point. So I think the key approach that we're taking, maybe just to summarize, is that I think boards need to go beyond just kind of passive oversight into active resilience planning that involves simulation, involves real-time close audits with your third-party partners, as well as figuring out how to leverage AI to detect, respond, and recover faster than we could do before.
More great points, Anthony. Thank you so much. I will confess that, having learned the hard way the importance of this third-party or vendor risk management out there, I just assumed that always focused on our own status, making sure we're okay. But the truth is, nobody operates in a vacuum. We're all operating as part of a network, and you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if people in your network, in your supply chain, in your subcontractor network don't have the right safeguards set up, you will suffer for it. And it's something to keep. So I appreciate all of you raising that point. The other thing you mentioned is AI as a force multiplier. I know I challenged Rob on that earlier, but you are all backing him up on this concept. And so I take your point very well, that AI driven, but human led. I think that's a great way to describe kind of the perfect approach here. That kind of transitions us over to Travis, kind of still looking at these attacks and out there. What about the regulations? I know you touched on them earlier, or other legal considerations for boards when trying to deal with these risk problems that are out there. And are there threats that you think today's boards just simply are not ready for, Travis?
Patrick, I unfortunately will apologize that I'm going to join the bandwagon with Rob and Vijay and Anthony and say as well that AI is a force multiplier. It is a tool for great good, and it is also a tool for great evil. I think a lot of the conversation that we've been having this afternoon around AI has focused on cyber, but the way it's disrupting cyber, it's also disrupting the workforce. It is also disrupting intellectual property portfolios of companies. It is also disrupting the way we do controls and think about everything. And that really raises the question of whether or not now is time for many companies to consider an AI risk management committee. We talk about the cyber risk management committee, but the AI risk, it does include cyber and security, and that's a really important component, but there are a lot of other risks that are out there as well, and it needs to be considered in a broader, through a broader lens. Not every public company, or not every company, public or private, will need an AI risk management committee, but for those where AI is a feature of the product, as in .ai is the end of your website, is your domain name. For those that are, engaging with massive amounts of data, for those that have, are rethinking the way they're developing intellectual property, those organizations want to have a more active approach, human-led approach to AI, and that is one concrete takeaway that I hope as you're thinking about the board that you're on, whether your organization is one that needs a dedicated risk management committee to resolve it. We're also in the cyber context more broadly, really looking and helping a lot of organizations with how their board conducts oversight. And there are key questions that board members ought to ask about the strategy for oversight around cybersecurity risk management. For example, is there a cyber strategy that we have? Is our cybersecurity investment enough? Another question that you might want to ask is whether we have appropriate insurance coverage, right, for in the event of a cyber incident. Do we have KPIs or other metrics to show our maturity in cybersecurity? And extremely importantly, has an independent cybersecurity risk assessment been performed? Independent is the key word. It's often tempting either not to do an assessment or to do it just with internal resources. It's more efficient. It is really critical on some regular basis, if not annually, to have independent cybersecurity risk assessments done and to make those results ultimately available. And then there's other questions that you might have about the board's role in managing cybersecurity risk as well as incidents when they take place. Because as of right now, the SEC's cybersecurity rule is still in effect. And what that means is if you have a cyber incident that's material, you need to make a determination about whether, well, you need to determine whether it's material, and you also need to make a determination about what disclosures you're going to make. How is this escalated to the board? Who makes the decision about it? What is material and what's not? How do we mitigate the business impact? These are all critical considerations that a board should be involved in. And of course, importantly, what's the role of the CISO in all of this and incorporating them into our disclosure process? Typically, prior to the SEC's cyber release for public companies, the information security professionals were not really part of the disclosure process. Now, we have to incorporate them in to make sure that we have that information stream available to us.
Thanks, Travis. Rob, going back to you, it looks like you started a snowballing unanimity of AI here on the panel. I think that's very good for our audience to hear the good and the bad that AI can perform in its role in today's modern boards. Any other proactive steps from your perspective that boards can take to help build resilience or deal with these threats?
Yeah, look, two setup points I want to make. I mean, first of all, it's great that we're talking about resilience. For so long, the cyber industry just concentrated on the detection and response and didn't consider the getting back to normal operations. And so that's a really positive thing. The second thing I want to say, it's not always cyber attacks that cause the outage. It can just as easily be an extreme weather event. It can be a natural disaster. It can be sabotage, or it can be a defective update. We all remember the update that was rolled out by CrowdStrike. I'm not looking to poke the finger of CrowdStrike, but it rolled out. It crippled a lot of businesses for hours, days. It caused havoc at airports. I was stuck in a hotel check-in line a mile long because the staff at the hotel didn't know how to manually check guests in without that property management software. So it's thinking about what is the software that we rely on? How long can we afford to be without it? What do we do if it goes down? So my 3 points thinking, first of all, with my geopolitical hat on, what is our organization's threat profile and how is it changing? How are the activities of the business locally or around the world causing that profile to change? And look, being under the radar is a great place to be, but for some companies, they're never going to be under the radar. So if I think Tesla, they've always had a high-profile CEO. In the last 6 months, they've attracted a lot more attention because of his kind of political affiliation and activities. So that's meant Tesla's been hit with physical attacks. Tesla's been hit with reputational attacks. This week they were hit with, or last week they were hit with a denial of service attack that meant that X did not function the way it did. So, what is your profile? What are you doing out there that might cause groups or nation states or criminals to decide that they want to take action to disrupt your business? Number two, you can't mitigate every possible attack. The old saying is, the defenders have to be right every single time. The attackers only have to get lucky once, right? And they're going to be in. So think about your attack surface. That's all of the points where your network touches the internet, where attackers can try and find a doorway into your network. Once they're in, they can move around, steal your data. So that's particularly, can you get rid of firewalls and VPNs and move to a zero trust architecture? This is what federal government has been told they need to do. This is what NIST says is the best practice. And lots of incidents around the world that have been reported would have been prevented if the company had had a zero trust architecture. And then 3, as Anthony said, simulations, practice, practice, practice. I did a survey with the NACD in my previous role. So this is going back about 18 months. And we found that half of the directors surveyed had not completed a cyber-focused crisis scenario in the previous year. Your IT and cyber folks need to be practicing what to do when things go wrong, but so does the exec team, so does the board. If you can face those problems in a safe environment where you've got time to think and discuss, and then you can build those learnings into the playbooks, it's going to leave you so much more better prepared than waiting until the real thing happens to try and respond.
Yeah, I love that good old-fashioned practice, practice, practice. I really do have to commend the NACD, and in particular the NorCal chapter, for hosting so many cyber tabletop exercises out there. I think it really helps boost your confidence and ability to deal with this when the inevitable happens to your company. I want to just kind of open up to the entire panel a couple of questions. The first is, I'll just say that the world's largest cybersecurity event conference is RSA, happens every year here in San Francisco. Last year, I heard another speaker there describe this period as the era of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer that Travis mentioned before. How can boards work with their management or their CISOs to help their CISOs be successful out there? Anyone have any input on that or thoughts?
I've spoken a little bit about the CISO during today's remarks, and certainly would echo a lot of the points that I made earlier about having the board meet with the CISO, on a regular basis. I think that's a good way to support them, hear directly from them about the challenges they face. But in CISO after CISO that I hear from, the biggest challenge that I hear that kind of runs across all of them is a lack of resources, and just feeling like the threats are evolving so often they don't have enough resources to be able to address a lot of issues in a timely manner. And so having the board asking questions to management to ensure that there's an adequate, doesn't mean you have to do everything, but an adequate investment in resources in the information security of the organization is probably one of the best things that a board could do.
Maybe one thing to add to that point is it's so important to also think about org structures, where you want to make sure the CISO actually has a direct line to both the CEO and the board. And sometimes inside the organization, there could be, not to say it will, but the CISO might not have a direct line, which actually causes some issues in terms of conflicts of interest in who they report to. So it's just something for the board to ask and keep that in mind.
I think one thing we've seen, Patrick, and also the leaders here, I think there is a set of inequity in that sort of the conversation, right? What I mean by that is there is a set of organizations where this is not an issue, like they're past that stage. So budget is not an issue, communication is not an issue, they have access to the board, et cetera, right? So look at kind of the Fortune 10, Fortune 50, I think they have a different problem. So I think, of course, there is no one size fit all. Their challenge is like, can the InfoSec team run as fast with their product and engineering team? Because for them, so the clients that I deal with, like it's all product and eng companies, and hands down, the product leaders will win. So if you're going to be a launch blocker for a feature or product release, you better have really, really good answers, or have you really enabled them, and don't come in the 11th hour to say, oh, I'm going to block you this release. So where were you like 5 months ago or 6 months ago? Why were you not sort of integrated with the engineering roadmap, et cetera, et cetera? So it's like, can you keep up with the innovation, the pace? And I think to Rob and Anthony's point, I think AI is like a really, really amazing forcing function. And it is really driving the level of innovation in different areas where, vulnerability management, et cetera. So it's really driving a forcing function. So yeah, I think we see the board kind of really driving that level of transparency and forcing the transparency and making sure that the CISO leadership has that level of integration with the product teams, engineering teams, et cetera.
And just one final thought from me to add to all of those great points. The CISO hasn't necessarily come up through a business background. The CISO may not have had a lot of experience working with boards, fully understanding what they want, what they need to perform their oversight duties. The board, conversely, may not understand what they need to be asking for from the CISO. So it's that building that partnership, maybe meeting outside of the regular meetings as well to understand what should they be asking for, getting advice from peers and third parties to help that relationship grow. Maybe give the CISO some coaching on how best to present to the board so both parties get out of the relationship what they need to get out of it.
Thanks to you all. I will say that there was a question in the chat addressed to Vijay about the consolidation of bills. But before I could even ask it, Vijay jumped in and answered it himself in the chat. So that's there. There's one other unanswered question that was in the chat. And just does anyone have any thoughts on updated risks and opportunities on dealing with China right now as a result of the current situation? Any thoughts anyone's interested in sharing on that?
Yeah, I had referred to that, Patrick, in my remarks earlier. The Department of Justice earlier this year finalized a rule that essentially prohibits individuals, businesses, organizations in the United States from sharing sensitive data with countries of concern. One of those is clearly China. And the definition of a country of concern would allow it to be broad enough to include even having an employee or a contractor that's based in China. And so essentially this rule is, limiting but prohibiting the transfer of personal data about US persons over to China. And that would include even if you don't actually, even if the data is stored on servers in the United States, but the person in China has access just to see it, view-only access, even that would be problematic. This is extremely sweeping. In President Trump's first term, he was very active against China. That continued through Biden. It will continue, I think, into the Trump administration. There is essentially a wall that is being built between technology created in China, Huawei, easy example, electric batteries, vehicles, EVs that are over there, and the United States. And so I highlighted it because there's so much risk there that if you are an organization that has any operations or any business with anything in China, it is very important to consider the growing, I just highlighted DOJ here, but there's more, the growing regulatory scrutiny over Chinese technology and access to US data.
Thanks, Travis. I'll say, I'm looking at the clock. We're almost out of time, but I want to give each one of our panelists an opportunity to share quickly a final thought or takeaway, or perhaps offer a question that directors can ask their management team at their next board meeting. I'm going to switch the order here and start with Anthony.
I think a key question would be, for me, as you think about it, if a breach did happen, do you as a company actually have a communication plan ready and set to go? I think the communication thing is usually one of those things that gets wrapped up later and it can cause a lot of issues. So I would say develop your communication plan of how you plan to talk to regulators, customers, and investors, and be prepared to handle the reputational fallouts, because it is one of those things that it's difficult to act in the moment. But it's extremely, really important. And maybe one more thing I will add to the earlier question. I think more and more security has to be thought through in the product itself. When you're developing a product, security should be part of that product design process. And I think that if you do that, I think a lot of companies are going to be in a lot less trouble. Thanks.
Rob, final thought from you?
Yeah, look, this is an incredibly broad and complex topic, and for directors trying to stay on top of what's going on out there, what it means for their business and what questions they have to ask management is really difficult. So I'm going to plug a monthly briefing that I'm doing with an NACD Northern California chapter. You'll find it linked from your monthly newsletter. Check it out. It'll give you a summary of what's going on and what it means, what you need to ask, and I'd welcome any feedback.
Thank you. Travis.
Cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination. Rob's point just now about continual education is critical. There are new threats. There's new technologies that are always being rolled out. There are new laws and regulations that are happening all the time. There's failures that you learn from other organizations and you try to improve. I think the most important takeaway that I could give you is keep working at it. Keep trying to get better. But there is no perfect security. And I swear if you found it today, it will be outdated tomorrow.
Great point. Vijay.
Hey, thanks, Patrick and team. I think the part I always think about it, keep it simple. So really, asking two questions from a board perspective to management, like, how secure am I? So can we answer that question by some very specific data-driven method to demonstrate sort of your efficacy of the security posture? And the second, from an AI perspective, ask the question about, is my AI secure? So it's kind of very similar in that way, and to demonstrate what are some of the techniques and methods and the controls you've implemented. So from a board perspective, kind of challenging management. And I think, again, the train's already moved. So this is already happening, and we are seeing amazing opportunity where AI is actually as a forcing function, helping the CISOs and the technology professionals as well as the business leaders, implementing that change for defending ourselves. So I think it's a great opportunity for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic advice. Thank you all, Anthony, Rob, Travis, and Vijay. And also thank you to our sponsors, Cooley, KPMG, and Zscaler. Our host here, NorCal of NACD, Lisa and crew, very, very much appreciate that. And finally, most importantly, our audience, we greatly appreciate you all joining us. Have a great week, everyone.